teasing.
Fair. You do that a lot.
Do I?
On TikTok to people who don't ask for it as well.
Yeah. My last TikTok, I picked on Ibrahim and had to add a caveat there saying, Ibrahim, please don't fire me after seeing this TikTok.
I actually was going to share it with my mum, and then I didn't. Because I knew instantly I knew instantly what was going to happen was she's going to be like, shut down your TikTok.
Annika, I think you didn't get the uniform memo today.
You guys didn't give me the uniform memo. I feel so out of place.
Yeah, I thought we'd match today, but then Ibrahim decided to go with brown shoes, and I just feel...
Well, you are kind of match. You have a brown touch.
Yeah, even the trousers.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Are they Levi's?
Yeah, they are.
These are Levi's as well.
Same.
He missed it. He still flew away.
Sorry, I must say take one.
Episode 1.
News Roundup, take 1.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IFG News Roundup. I am your host, Khidr Mohammed, and this to my right, I had to make sure it was my right, but I was using my left hand, is Ibrahim Khan, the co-founder, as you probably know.
And the way you said this was like, this thing.
This guy over here who's just intruded. Could be looked at in a positive way. I was like, this.
We didn't do that. You said this.
True. Take it how you want. It's interpretive. And then we've also got our head of partnerships returning for another episode, Annika Shah. Right. We've got an exciting set of stories for you. And let's kick off with a viral video. So recently in India, a hijabi woman was being booed and heckled by a group of Hindutva thugs who are trying to get the hijab banned in their province. So that kind of triggered a question for me about the rise of far right across the world. We're kind of seeing trends everywhere from America, Hungary, France is a great example of rise of far right in our back door. We are seeing similar sentiments in the UK and in other places, and it's starting to become quite worrying. What do you think, Ibrahim?
I mean, even you've become a skinhead.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'll be banning the hijab soon. Astaghfirullah.
What do I think about what the far right?
The rise of the far right.
Yeah, it's not good. Obviously, I think I'm
surprised.
There's an interesting trend bubbling, I think, in the Muslim community around how the locations, the geographies where we live as minorities are perhaps not the ideal places where we see the future of us and our families. And I think there's an element of racism and there's far right stuff going on, but then there's also an element of moral values and ethics that are perhaps misaligning, and it could be around modesty and LGBTQ related stuff. It could be about this hijab stuff. There's a whole range of things that it's not because I think these locations, perhaps like let's say the West, has become a lot more muscular about a certain set of values or ethics that I think different to, let's say, the average Muslims. And so the point I'm making is that I feel like we're on the cusp of the next few decades seeing a lot of relocations in the opposite direction, perhaps to Muslim majority countries and the like. And then I think over the next 30 years, there might even be a link to the end of the nation state. But, well, I'll stop there.
That's very interesting. I could really see your politics and philosophy background coming into play here. Annika, as a Muslim woman, have you ever felt that a country like the UK, or maybe other European countries that you might have visited, have you ever felt like you don't belong and would consider moving to a Muslim majority country, if not for the sake of your daughter?
Good.
Oh, you just chuck your daughter in there.
I thought I'd put some emotion into it.
So if you'd asked me this question a year ago, I would say that alhamdulillah, I've never experienced any adversity because of wearing the hijab. And I think that's because we live in London, very multicultural, like, you know, there's so many cultures and everyone's accepting of everyone's beliefs, values, even if they're not the same. However, over the past, so I've worn the hijab for 10 years. And so, you know, alhamdulillah, it's been...
Different ones though, right?
Different one. Maybe similar to your purple jumper. I wear the same hijab. Yeah, no, over the last few months, I have felt some more animosity in certain interactions where I don't understand where that's come from. So, like, examples are like being on the train and just having like rude comments. But that's something that I think is tolerable, like it's okay. And again, it's not anything major, it's just me really looking into something, perhaps being sensitive about a comment or not, and thinking, okay, is this attributed to because the fact that I'm a visible Muslim, or is this on other factors? It's hard to say and hard to pinpoint like where negative sentiment comes from.
I do sometimes think like on what Ibrahim said about the West being more muscular about their values and kind of enforcing certain values on people, if not us as adults, they're being enforced now on children, as we can see with like the whole SRE curriculum and stuff. And I've got young boys, and I remember going to their nursery, and they go to the local nursery, and we live in a relatively pretty conservative neighborhood. You know, it's mostly white British people there. It's somewhat diverse, but not that much. And I remember seeing a big pride poster, rainbow, that was made with the handprints of the kids that go to the school. And right next to that, there was an Eid Mubarak banner. So I was just seeing those two next to each other, and I was like a bit like, okay, did my kids have a hand in making this poster? And then obviously the Eid Mubarak thing, I'm like, okay, yeah, great. Muslim messages getting out there. But at the same time, you're seeing those two together, and it's like quite conflicting for a child to view that. So it makes me think like, okay, are they going to teach my children the wrong kind of values? And do I see Islam persisting in my progeny for the next, like, say, 4 generations? Will my great grandkids still be Muslim?
I think it's a really, really good point, and something I haven't actually thought about for my daughter who's 1 year old. But I also think it's hard to escape it. So, for example, this viral video that you spoke about, yes, it happened in India, but it has an impact on anyone that's watched it. So I've watched it, and I was like, okay, I can't imagine how that woman was feeling, because I don't think I would have that courage to stand up. Like I mentioned, there's a comment on the train, and I'm talking about it. But to have that kind of backlash, whether you're in the UK or if you're in India or in a Muslim majority country, you still feel the effects of the far right or, discrimination.
Fair. What do you think, Ibrahim? Have you thought about, hijrah for your kids, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think it's inevitable.
Yeah?
I think we're heading... I mean, Boris Johnson, he's going to be coming up very shortly, is from a Muslim family, isn't he?
That's true.
Can you imagine having drinking parties in 10 Downing Street and he's from a Muslim family?
Great-grandfather was a Hafiz.
There we go. So, the things can escalate very rapidly if you, you lose control.
I think it's a legitimate fear, and I think a lot of Muslims, I personally know quite a few Muslims who have relocated to countries like Turkey. They've either got properties here in the UK that they've put up for rent, and now they've got passive income coming in, and they're just, they've bought a nice property in Turkey, and I think they've gotten citizenship there, and now they're just living it up. I know other friends of mine who have actually, for these exact reasons, have moved to countries like Qatar, Egypt, Saudi, for example. Although modernization is happening everywhere, and I feel like that is also a conversation that needs to be had. But because the majority population is Muslim, the overall culture will still be linked to Islam, and it'll be hard to escape that. So I feel like, there is this trend going on, and these conversations are being brought into the open, but who knows?
On the flip side, do you feel like, I'm just advocating for London, but on the flip side, do you feel like if you persist in a community where it's not standard to be Muslim. And the example that comes to mind is like eating halal meat. I know a lot of people that have come from like Muslim majority countries like the Middle East, and when they come here it's like eating halal isn't a thing because it's just so commonplace to be able to eat wherever you want. But when you've grown up and you know you're explicit, not everything is easy for you, and as a result you end up being a little bit more conscious of those values. There's like two sides to the story.
I get what you mean. It's like, you know, if you put someone on the back foot on something, they will always be kind of consciously aware. Like, for example, if you put a Muslim kid in a non-Muslim school, he'll be consciously aware that he has to eat halal meat, he has to pray, he has to do X, Y, and Z. Whereas if you put a Muslim kid in a Muslim majority school, but those values aren't effectively taught to them, you know, they might not consciously do it. They might just do it out of culture, and when they're taken out of that culture, they then will lose kind of consciousness of that, which I think is fair. I always think about, and I'll kind of move on to the next story after this point. I'm reminded about the partition between India and Pakistan, and I was watching this documentary about it, and it amazed me at the fact that these people, you know, Muslims have been in Hind, which is the region known as India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, currently, have been there since, you know, as early as like the first few generations of Islam, since the Umayyad Empire, so more than 1,000 years, I'd say. But when push came to shove, the Muslims were effectively kicked out and brutally massacred. I mean, it did happen both ways as well, so inevitably. But there was a lot more Muslim deaths disproportionately, with people who were otherwise their neighbors for the longest time. And all of a sudden, people turned on them just like that. So I was like, it made me think to myself, well, the West is essentially a non-Muslim country, a non-Muslim like region, and you could very well kind of see things happen like this if, you know, if we do continue to descend into this trend of fascism. Do you want to add something, Ibrahim? Oh.
I mean, this is quite a
Deep.
somber tone to end. You know, just check your neighbor's eyes next time, look deep into them, and, you know, just judge him or her.
Moving on, Ibrahim, you mentioned our beloved or non-beloved Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. So what story have you got for us today?
I mean, what story should we start with? The stories he's been telling everyone, or, you know, the actual story about him. So Boris Johnson, for those of you who've been perhaps living under a rock, is the Prime Minister of the UK. He's one of the biggest liars in the country. That is well known, right?
Ibrahim's gunning for him,
There's Kavzi nodding in the background.
He's been, you know, doing all sorts of shenanigans in 10 Downing Street, holding drinking parties and, you know, free. I mean, it is free mixing as well, I guess, but it's you know, getting within 2 meters of each other
during lockdown. Right?
During lockdown, when everyone else was being told to stay at home, and everyone else was pretty much staying at home as well, and I think the worst of it is that he lies about it. Initially, he resisted until things came out, and then he just, like, you know, he apologized. A very groveling apology, it has to be said, because he realized that really there was at this point no way back unless he made like a major apology. And he's still hanging on. Somehow, remarkably, he's still hanging on. I think he is basically a walking dead man. And I think it'll take probably either the elections in May, I think it is, to bring him down, or something else, you know, dramatic to happen. But I just can't see a prime minister needs to be credible. When he comes onto the TV next time and he says, "We're going to have a lockdown," he has no credibility. And if that's you, then, you know, if you're not trustworthy, you don't have credibility or respect. You can't be a premier.
I mean, to be fair, I would argue that he didn't have much of that before being elected the Prime Minister. So how he ended up in that seat is beyond me. But I'd like to throw a counter argument out there. I think we live in a time of great uncertainty. We've got COVID, we're post-Brexit, where none of the kind of great deals that we were being promised actually have come to fruition and have led to like incredibly complexities in regards to our interactions with the EU and trade. So for example, there's a lot of hold up with lorry drivers in France, which is affecting the supply chain here in the UK. So prices are being hiked up, and not to mention a whole host of other problems. Is it wise to now, in the middle of all of this, add an election and change the leader, and it just complicates things. It adds another layer of complexity that we necessarily don't need.
Respectfully, Khizr, I think that's a bad argument. I think he's a disgraceful man, and he should be removed ASAP. I think a better argument would have been that 10 Downing Street is a business, and it's a company, or it's like a institution, and people are working there, and of all the people in the UK that are all locked down, there are certain pockets that just needed to work, like the NHS, for example. People weren't going around measuring how far apart doctors and nurses were, and politicians, i.e. the leaders, arguably one could say that, look, they just need to work hard, and they're working full time, and in that context, social distancing is it's not as pertinent, and perhaps we are now looking back and judging them with like a different lens to what the reality of the situation was. I think that would have been a good argument.
Okay, fair.
That is quite a good argument.
Do you have a counter argument to that?
I think that he should have been still very cognizant of the fact that he's a leader, and that what he does is then followed by other people, and if he is internally having these parties that are completely unnecessary. Like, I mean, all of us had parties as well. And
did we?
Not during lockdown, but afterwards. But that period where we were switching from lockdown to normal, that period, there was sensitivity around it. And if someone was doing something dodgy, and let's face it, in the Muslim community, in the Asian community, there's all sorts of dodgy stuff going on as well every so often, people would judge that, and they wouldn't be happy with it. So you, as the Prime Minister, you should definitely have a sense that what is happening here is not right. And so, yeah, I think he needs to go.
Fair. What do you think, Annika? Is Bojo in or out for you?
Yeah, I mean, before hearing that, he was out to me. But after hearing this, absolutely. I mean, yeah, just to echo, I think as a leader, you lead by example, and he hasn't been a very good example.
But just to give some pushback, I don't think any of the leaders that the UK has had of recent times have been great examples of leaders. Like I get this idea of him being the leader and like the kind of figurehead for the government, but essentially the government isn't this. It's not a dictatorship in which his decisions kind of ultimately reign. It's a whole collective of people that are making these policies. Yeah, he has to sign it off, but like it is.
He's a moron. If you look at Mr. Speaker, former Mr. Speaker John Bercow, he's seen 10 prime ministers, and he said very, clearly that out of all 10 of them, this guy is by far like the biggest moron, and he's incompetent. He's unethical. Even Tony Blair, right? I think Tony Blair is a massive scumbag, but I don't think he's a moron. Can I respect him at the dispatch box? Can I respect him if he talks to a president of America? Yes, I think so. David Cameron, yeah, you can respect him, even though you might think he is still deep down a scumbag.
What's the difference? What's the difference between a scumbag and a moron?
So the difference between a scumbag and a moron is that can he command your respect? If someone can command your respect, they may well still be a scumbag. So let's say, for example, you have, Tony Blair is a good example, right? He went to war on Iraq, but is he someone that, is classy? Is he someone who can, conduct himself well? Is he someone who you think would go through an appropriate process, at least, to his, to further his ends on a decision? I think so. Do I think Boris Johnson reads all the things that are given to him, actually is well informed about what he's up to? Is he hardworking? I don't think any of those things are true.
I've never heard Ibrahim so passionately speak about a topic.
Because I don't talk about politics normally. That's why.
We're getting to see a glimpse of Ibrahim's politic background. For those of you that don't know, he did PPE at Oxford University. So
same college as David Cameron.
Ooh.
Some of the same tutors as well.
Nice. Right, and I think that was a wrap on that topic. I think I'm the only one that I didn't support Boris Johnson, but I kind of gave him a bit of
credibility.
A shred of credibility. I wouldn't entirely.
Is he in or out for you?
Oh, he's definitely out. I hated the guy before he even joined, and I think most prime ministers that the UK has had from the Tory party were terrible decision makers, and they essentially, they helped the rich, and they didn't give a crap about the. I don't know if crap's a bad word. That might be something to. Yeah, but the regular folk, they've kind of thrown under the bus. So I'm not really for the Tory party. I'm not particularly a fan of Labour either, but I did think Jeremy Corbyn was probably the only shred or only hope that this country had, but unfortunately that didn't go well. But yeah, the country is heading in the direction it's heading in, so we can only make dua and hope for the best. Now, moving swiftly on, we've got a very interesting discussion now. Why don't you take us through it, Annika?
Yeah, so this is essentially the topic of apprenticeships versus university. So is it more beneficial to do an apprenticeship or go down the standard route of university? So there's an article that came out that was discussing the matter, and I guess I'll throw it over to you guys to see what are your thoughts on, let's bring in children. Let's bring in, your children. If they came to you in the time to come, Dad, should we do an apprenticeship or university? What would be your advice?
Okay, before we dive into that, let's get it clear. Did you do an apprenticeship or did you go to university?
I went to university.
You went to university. You went to university. I did an apprenticeship. Okay, so now we know where we've got a mix here. I'll start off. I have quite I don't think controversial opinion on this, but I do have a strong opinion on this.
If you're saying I don't think I have a controversial, it's a controversial opinion.
I think university is overrated.
That's controversial opinion.
Kind of, but here's what I think. Nowadays, you can get a degree in things that you don't need a degree in to get to know the job. There's certain vocations where it's easier to learn on the job, and you don't need to sit through lectures after lectures, learn it. For example, there's an actual degree in catering, and I feel like catering is quite obviously a profession that you would, practically apply. Even the businessy elements of it, you can kind of learn that. And I do feel like university is needed, but for vocational careers that, you can't learn just through practicality. For example, medicine, because you don't want to learn that on the go. You don't want to be experimenting, drug dosages on people while you don't know anything. You need to learn the theory beforehand before you start practicing. Similarly with engineering, aerospace, chemical engineering, for example, pharmacology. A lot of these areas require degrees are quite essential, and with the humanities as well. But I think that now we've gotten to a point where everywhere is just building universities for the sake of building universities and charging extortionate prices for those courses that you can very well learn on the go. So I did an apprenticeship in public relations, and it was great. And the article on the BBC that you were referring to, Annika, the guy says that apprenticeships opened his eyes to the world a lot more than university would have, in the sense, and I do completely understand that, because when I was working, you're getting an insight to the corporate life, as well as gaining the experience that's so essential to taking on more work and being employable. I don't know, what are your thoughts?
I agree with you. It does depend on what it is you want to be able to do. However, I think there's a lot more facets to the decision making other than course. So, like, for example, like, I do think there's a lot of value in apprenticeships, and I haven't done one to be able to speak to it, but I see the fact that working earlier and getting exposure into that industry, like, it makes a lot of sense, and then you can probably rise through the ranks faster as if you've started at the age of 16 as opposed to 21. However, although there's more value in maybe starting earlier, and on the flip side, university, I agree, is not all where you do all of your learning, but the side aspects or the things that you get from university, I don't think you can get anywhere else. So, like, one thing that comes to mind, for example, is you met Mohsin at university, right? If you hadn't had that experience, would you have founded IFG together? And it's not what you learn in your course, you know, doing PPE. It's the people you met, the experiences that you've had, and you may get similar experiences during apprenticeship, but just that time you have to be able to grow. And I think for me personally, university was where I went from a kid to an adult. Those 3 years were invaluable, not in terms of what I learned. So I studied maths and I haven't used any of it, but the people, the relationships, how I grew as a person, I don't think I would have been able to do an apprenticeship. So coming back to my question, would I advise it for my children? It's kind of hard to say. Like, the answer is I don't know. But I'm kind of leaning towards university.
Fair. What do you think, Ibrahim?
I think you go to university for either the skill sets or the signal that it sends. And I think that if you go to the Russell Group universities, it's a strong signal. So even if you do like a really dodgy degree, like, I don't know, you do, French like Mohsin did, but you do it at a good university, then that still has a lot of signaling power. If you do it at a not so good university, then it's not really worth it. And especially because you're not going to get that much skills out of it. Now, if you're doing skills, then I think going to university makes sense still, because if you do maths at a not so good university, it's still ultimately going to be somewhat useful, or engineering or computer science or something. But yeah, overall, I do agree that it's horses for courses. Like, sometimes apprenticeships just do make a lot of sense, especially for vocational things. But I think overall, if you have the grades and you can do it, then I think university overall means that you probably have better chances at life. And I know, of course, in your case, it was unique circumstances. You got into medicine, but you were overseas, and you were an overseas student, so you couldn't afford it, and then blah 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 blah. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
No, I think that's fair. I do feel like there is this whole excess of, like, you've now got universities popping up everywhere, and I do believe that universities are necessary, but I do think there's you have to balance that the usability and like the need of that university with actually it has to be a university that provides some sort of value. And like you said, if they're doing courses that ultimately probably don't add that much value, and then they're still charging the same extortionate amounts. We look at the amount of students with student debt. They're coming out and they're paying this off over. I think here in the UK it's not as bad, but in America, like, it's atrocious. And you're paying off that debt like well into your 40s, and it's quite puts people in a lot of difficult situations. But I agree with you. Ultimately, depends what you want to go into and what you aim for. Well, that was a very exciting discussion. We touched some very controversial points with my two guests. Inshallah, catch us in another fortnight's time for another episode of the News Roundup. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum.